Welcome to this evening's panel discussion entitled British and Irish Trade Unions on Palestine, facilitated by the Palestinian Return Centre. This evening's panel discussion will be focusing on the historic solidarity between trade unions and the Palestinian struggle, and trade union and worker mobilization as a means of popular struggle. Our first speaker of this evening's panel discussion is Jerry Carroll. Jerry is the People Before Profit MLA for West Belfast, who has represented the Belfast West constituency in the Northern Ireland Assembly since May 2016. Jerry has been an outspoken voice for Palestinian human rights and freedom throughout his time in politics. Over to you, Jerry.
Thousand Palestinians killed, at least 100,000 injured, although on the scale of the atrocities and the scale of the slaughter, it's likely to be a lot more because some bodies are simply not counted. They're still under the rubble. So the scale of what's happened is horrific. And I want to start off by extending our solidarity to everybody, obviously in Palestine and Palestinian communities, maybe watching this event. And I think hopefully, people can, under the barbarity of apartheid Israel, under bombardment on a daily basis. 6 months it's been of daily massacres, 6 months of buildings being destroyed, 6 months of hospitals being blown to bits, universities, and really barbaric stuff from top to bottom. And we just hope that, through our solidarity and our activism, I'm based in Belfast, obviously, but in Belfast and across Ireland, that at the very least it can give some solidarity to Palestinians, and hopefully it can sort of bring about a proper ceasefire, which is obviously in Israel's gift to implement and to do. So I'll talk a bit about Ireland and what's been happening, and hopefully people can get a flavour of what's been happening. I mean, we've basically seen huge demonstrations, obviously globally for Palestine, in the Middle East and America, most parts, a lot of parts of Europe. But in Ireland as well, there's been huge demonstrations right across the country, in every single corner and every single quarter, right through. And there's been demonstrations in Dublin of around, I think, 100,000 people in some cases. Some people would estimate obviously more. And obviously, given the size of the population in Ireland, maybe compared to Britain or bigger countries, it is 100,000 and more is quite large. We've demonstrations in Belfast of sometimes around 15, close to 20,000 as well. And these are, quite broad, people of all backgrounds. And I'll come on that in a bit later. And they're working class in nature. It's predominantly, not exclusively, but predominantly working class people who are coming out and who are appalled by what they're seeing. And part of my role as an MLA in West Belfast, along with our team and our branches here, we've played a role in organising, I think it was around at least 10 local protests in working class communities in West Belfast. So like Lanadoon, Twinbrook, St James's. And for people who don't know, these are working class estates where you have Palestine flags flying from people's homes. You have murals for Palestine, in solidarity with Palestine. And we've played a role to use my position as an MLA and our party resources to try and mobilise working class constituencies to come out in support of Palestine. And there's been other similar events in other parts of Belfast where our comrades and other activists and different groups have played a role in mobilising there as well. And I think that's been very, very important because it is a class issue. There's, you don't have to be working class to be supportive of Palestine, but there's been a working class movement, I think, across these islands of people standing up and sick and tired of complicit governments sick and tired of governments sitting on their hands and sick and tired of governments selling weapons to Israel. And predominantly it's been working class people that have came out, certainly in Ireland, against that. And I think obviously, Farah touched upon it there, but there's been a history of sort of solidarity with people in Ireland with Palestinians. I think part of that is down to the historical nature of the British Empire and partition in Ireland and imperialism, sort of in a historical sense here, and the connection between the black and tans being used in Ireland and then being sent to Palestine. Part of it is obviously historical, and people's memory of Britain is pretty bad when you come to talk about Ireland. But also it's people from various backgrounds, seeing on their TV screens and on their phones a genocide being live streamed and people being absolutely disgusted by that and taken into the streets. And I think whilst this may be the similar position for countries across the world, maybe certainly in the Middle East and certainly in America, there's a huge gap between what countries' governments are saying and doing and what the people are doing. So we're seeing obviously students revolting in America, but Biden still, hitching his wagon to Israel, despite all the massacres and all the slaughter. And similarly, whilst the Irish government, on a global scale, may be better than some other governments compared to Britain, it still is quite weak. It still refuses to properly support the South African ICJ case. Still refuses to support and vote for the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador, but it feels the pressure, and occasionally you might see glimpses of former Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and I think Taoiseach Micheál Martin occasionally, and I have to say is the occasionally saying something vaguely supportive or what could perceived to be vaguely supportive of Palestine. And the reason why is because they're looking over their shoulders. They're looking over their shoulders and seeing the mass amount of people on the streets across this island. And they're in an election year, and they obviously, for them, votes is the most important thing. And if they see people on a mass scale in the streets for Palestine, they have to at least reflect that somewhat in their speeches. But obviously for us, what they've been saying and what they've been doing falls far short of what they could be doing to stand up for the Palestinians. So yeah, so those demonstrations have been across the country, and there's many towns and cities that I haven't talked about, but in most there's been a demonstration of some sort in them, and they've been working class, like I said, in nature predominantly, and even on them. There's people that I know who are trade unionists. In some of the Belfast protests, you're seeing people with trade union flags. But I think what's really missing is official unions kind of getting behind the Palestine protests in Ireland, in North and South. And the emphasis we've seen individuals doing an important role, playing an important role, leading some of the demonstrations. But what's missing is Nick Ictu, the Northern Ireland Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and ICTU, the national organisation, really using its resources to get people out, to get members out, to get banners out, and to really mobilise working class, or the organised working class movement on a mass way. So whilst individuals have done an important job in the union movement, I think that's been missing. And that's been missing for all sorts of reasons. But in part in North, I think too many trade union leaders and maybe some reps as well buy into this idea in the North that Palestine is divisive, which when you think about it is completely bonkers. You have a genocide being committed on a daily basis, and people across the world standing up against it. But some people in the union movement don't want to mobilize their members or don't want to mobilize their full union resources because they think that could provoke a reaction from maybe pro-Israeli loyalists or people in the North who have the wrong position on Palestine. So that's a pretty weak defence, a weak position to hold, but it's something that is in the air, and certainly people for profit, we're calling that out. We're emphasising that, in these protests, there's people from East Belfast, South, West, North, and people from all sort of communal backgrounds in the North who are attending these protests as well. So I think whilst there's been a good element of working class mobilisation over the past 6 months. I think we can obviously always do more. And my call really from tonight would be to make sure those organised battalions of labour really utilise their members, utilise their banners, utilise their members to get out and to make sure these demonstrations do get bigger. So I'll leave it there, and thanks for inviting me to speak tonight.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Always a pleasure to host and to hear from you. Our second speaker of today's panel discussion is Austin Harney. Austin is the Joint PCS Liaison Officer, TUC Union Rep, and will be speaking in a personal capacity. Over to you, Austin.
All right. Good evening, Farah. Sorry, I had rather problems with the internet just recently, but anyway, I thank Jerry for a very good speech tonight. So hopefully I won't have to talk too much about, he's done a bit of work for me, but there are things I'll add in which I think that might have been left out. We can't have everything put in. But yeah, I think it's really important from the trade union point of view. I mean, PCS Union, I'm on the National Executive Committee and I'm speaking in a personal capacity. But we have actually, since 2009, we actually have pushed for the TUC and ourselves to affiliate to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and we have formed links with the Palestinian trade unions as well. So we really have put the pressure, and we've been calling for trade unions to engage in boycott, divestment, sanctions. And I know that Unison is doing a very good job right now trying to organise a boycott against certain pension funds that have links with Israeli companies. Also, PCS itself is trying to promote a boycott on arms sales to Israel. So that's something we are putting a lot of effort and work into. And my own workplace, I have my largest workplace is in Birmingham, because it's a slightly multi-geographical branch. I have a massive Muslim membership. And the trouble is I'm trying to build PCS representation amongst Muslims in the workplace who feel very much neglected. But they're all united on Palestine. And the problem is, we are told too many lies about Palestine. We're told that we all know how what the evil atrocities that the current Israeli government is doing under Benjamin Netanyahu, and has been doing so for decades. But the trouble is, it's portrayed in the news media as Israel as the victim, despite how many killings and atrocities and massacres that they're carrying of innocent civilians, which is just continuous and relentless. Now, I'm actually second generation Irish, by the way, and I decided to support, I've always supported and the first person to volunteer to be liaison officer of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign without any thought. People have said, oh, it's very brave of you. I said, no, not really. I'm from an Irish family, and they took part in the War of Irish Independence and even the Civil War and never sold out. My own great uncle went on hunger strike. So, you know, he was fighting before the Balfour Declaration. But I think what's important to all of us, how we go forward on this one, is we look at the common issues between the Irish and the Palestinians, because the Irish, many sections of the Irish society are not fooled by the lies in the news media. We've had a terrible historical struggle going back centuries. Now, many of you have heard about the curse of Cromwell, always talked about by the Irish, Cromwell as the most evil man at the time. What is not mentioned was what that war was really all about. He was in there in Ireland to defend the settlers. That's why he put every woman and child to the sword at Drogheda and Wexford. And how that war began was in 1641. The Great Irish Rebellion, that was against the King Charles at the time, and they're soon taken over by Cromwell. They were actually in rebellion over the systematic colonisation of the west of Ireland under William Wentworth, Lord Stratford at the time, Earl of Stratford. After they'd colonised Ulster, they then tried to colonise Connaught, but he didn't do it on time. He'd fallen out with Parliament, had been called back. So the colonisation plan didn't go ahead, but the Irish decided to rise up in rebellion, and that included the newly formed Irish Army. So in many respects, that rebellion is very identical to the Palestinian Intifada of the year 2000. Not mentioned in the history books now, but it should be, and we should make that very, very clear. And the very reason why Cromwell suppressed the Irish is exactly the same way as Benjamin Netanyahu is suppressing the Palestinians, murdering women and children just like Cromwell was. That is completely identical. The other issues of where it's identical, well, boycott came from William Erskine boycott at a time when Irish people were being evicted in the 19th century, just like Palestinians are today. He was one of the agents enforcing these evictions. And what happened was he was shunned like a leper of old. so that it gave his name to the English language, and we've used it ever since. The other issue is Balfour Declaration. It's not really mentioned publicly that he used to be the junior minister for the British government. I think it was under Lord Salisbury originally, but a few prime ministers. He was actually the junior minister for Ireland. He was carrying out systematic evictions of Irish tenants, and he was known as Bloody Balfour by the Irish at the time, but never mentioned publicly, but it should be. So there we are. Your struggle is our struggle, the Irish and the Palestinians. I think that's really important. And I think there's a huge amount of identity. The other issue is colonization and betrayal. Don't forget that the colonization of Palestine is still going on. We've got the largest peace process ever, the longest peace process in history I've ever known since 1993, and they're going backwards. It's unbelievable. It's a massive betrayal like never before. And they only not long ago, they want to annex the Jordan Valley, starving the Palestinians of their own breadbasket. What an absolute disgrace. So this betrayal, of course, has happened before. Yasser Arafat, the Oslo Accords. So Jerry might come in later on, but the Treaty of 1921 that partitioned Ireland and did horrific damage to Ireland at the time, the Irish Civil War, but also what's been happening is now happening to Palestine today on a far horrific scale that we cannot possibly imagine. And the treachery of the Arab neighbours to Palestine, many Irish people, sections of Irish society have been betrayed as well in the Civil War since that time. So there is a common issue here. Betrayal and colonization have brought us close together. It's not blood, it's those two things that bond the Irish and the Palestinians far closer. And I think from the trade union point of view, that's important of what we promote. I'll talk about the history of the trade unions that we did try to promote an all working worker struggle. Jim Larkin did in 1908, the Protestants and the Catholics on strike, the Belfast lockout. There was the outdoor relief strike of 1932, where they rioted together. But these dreadful conservative establishments did everything they could to divide and conquer the ordinary working people. That is exactly what Israel did when there were strikes between the Arabs and the Israeli workers. Sorry, I haven't got the years and the dates with me right now, so I do apologize. But I'm just making that quite clear. And as for the growth of Palestinian trade unionism, well, that really was a product, I think, of Britain going into Palestine. The Zionists at the time did not have enough numbers to stand up to the Palestinian people, but they were protected by the British troops, buying lands off the Palestinian farmers and then driving the Palestinian workers off their lands. And it was only after the Holocaust, when they had enough numbers, that turned very, very nasty, that they decided after there was Nakba that resulted here, they decided to colonize Palestine systematically and are still doing so today. And we have the disgraceful trade unions, the Histadut, promoting a hierarchy of racism in those trade unions. But that's something we, the Irish, have suffered at practical level in the British trade union movement, even up to this day, that we've been patronised and sidelined, particularly in Britain. But also other ethnic minorities, particularly black people as well, have been sidelined very much in British trade unionism. We're all fighting back. So, there's been progress. It can be open to scrutiny. But what we're seeing in Palestine is unbelievable. We're seeing everything regress on a horrendous systematic scale. I will say quite clearly, yes, demonstrations, they are growing, but I think it's more than demonstrations. What the trade unions need to start doing is to engage and put boycott, divestment, sanctions into practice. Now, Unison is already starting that with the pension funds from the local authorities that are well in with Israeli companies, but especially like Viola. But we have to do something ourselves as well. We have to make that more widespread throughout the British trade union movement. We have trade unions who are affiliated to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but we need to do a lot more. I mean, we succeeded in banning Histadut from the TUC as well under Francis O'Grady, the General Secretary, but we need to do far more. And, I'm speaking in a personal capacity tonight because I've always campaigned for troops out of the 6-county state. I have to be careful what language I use at trade union conferences, who I offend. At times I've been restricted in the past, but now we're speaking far more out about Palestine. And I think we need to promote that far more, how we go about this. Of course, I will talk about the future of Ireland. That's a separate debate, so please forgive me, and you're more than happy to make contact with me afterwards, Jerry. More than happy to work with you. It's an offer. But that's something we need to do, how we need to go forward and fight for ordinary Palestinian workers. I think it's very important also for the many Muslim members of my own workplace that I represent, who are also fully behind me on what we do internationally as PCS Union. So I'm just gone into a lot of detail here on how we must go forward, the trade unions in Britain and Ireland, what we must do. We must start putting more pressure on other countries all over the world through other trade unions. And we need to start the program for boycott, divestment, sanctions on the current Israeli government. We succeeded against apartheid in South Africa, who was the great ally of Israel in the 1980s, by the way, you wouldn't believe. South Africa sent troops to Lebanon, Beirut, to assist the Israeli army, whilst the Israeli army sent troops over to Angola in South Africa to fight against those the left-wing rebels there at the time. So that's something that shouldn't be forgotten either. The biggest problem is that the United States will continue to support Israel. We have to put enormous pressure as well. We have to do it through make the Irish American lobby wake up to reality on this issue, that this can't keep going on such a scale. What we need, and this is terrible because people have blamed lobbies as well, the Jewish lobby in America, but the brutal in the American Congress. But the brutal reality is that this has always been an Anglo-American imperialist project. They could not colonize the Middle East with white people. That's what's said quite clearly in the book by Bernard Reagan, the Balfour Declaration. They succeeded in doing it in Africa, but not in the Middle East. So they turned to the Zionists who could do this by colonizing the Middle East and creating an ally and a satellite state of their own. That is exactly what they did. But we, the trade unions, we need to educate all the workers on the ground. We need to dispel the myths, the lies in the news media through the establishments. I must say, sorry, I've got to be careful what I say. The false accusations of anti-Semitism have been used as a way to weaponize for us to stand up for the Palestinian people. This is something we also need to tackle as well. So it's important. The trade unions, they are the workers, they are the backbone of every country through the workers' movements. That's the only way that we can undermine all these establishments that are supporting Israel. I want to finally conclude. Solidarity to you all. May we go forward. When we support the workers' struggles the whole way for the Palestinian people, ensure the return of the 7 million Palestinians, to ensure trade union rights in Palestine, to make sure that they have all their lands back, and that reparations need to be paid to the Palestinian people by any future Israeli government, and also the American and British governments. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Austin, for your time and your contribution. We are just going to take an interval period before hearing from our third and final speaker. In the interval, I'm just going to read a piece I had written on worker solidarity and utilizing worker solidarity for the Palestinian struggle. It's entitled, "United Workers Hold the Power to Stop Genocide in Gaza." So I'm just going to read this piece. Whilst bombs drop over Gaza from the hands of a few, the feet of the many have taken to the streets across the world to not only call for an immediate ceasefire, but demanding Palestine's freedom and liberation once and for all. For the last 6 months, Israel has unleashed all-out genocide on the 2.4 million Palestinians imprisoned in blockaded Gaza. A place once referred to as an open-air prison has now turned into a concentration camp overnight. Israel has intensified its already inhumane blockade by blocking all food, water, fuel, medicine, electricity, and internet into Gaza. In the first few days, Israel dropped over 6,000 bombs over Gaza, the equivalent of a quarter of a nuclear bomb, and more than 6,500 Palestinians were murdered within the first few days. And as of right now, the figure is anywhere between 40 and 50,000 Palestinians murdered since October 7th. The ruling classes from Washington to Westminster have unashamedly signed off on Gaza's genocide, ignoring calls by their own people for a ceasefire. Just in November alone, sorry, I'm a bit sick, one moment. Apologies for the pause there. I'm a bit unwell, so just excuse a few water breaks between the reading. So just to resume the piece that I was reading in terms of worker solidarity and Palestine. The bureaucrats in Brussels and Geneva have only acted as accomplices to this genocide, whilst mainstream media have been fanning its flames by dehumanizing an entire defenseless population with headlines and front pages filled with disinformation and deceit. It's clear the establishment have given the green light for this genocide in utter contempt of the millions across the globe that have taken to the streets to stop it. Bearing witness to the horrifying genocide unfolding in Gaza and indeed all over occupied Palestine, the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions, labor associations, and professional syndicates have issued a unified statement containing an urgent call to take action. A coalition of more than 30 Palestinian trade unions, consisting of health professionals, journalists, trade workers, midwives, postal workers, and more, have called for global solidarity to, quote, end all forms of complicity with Israel's crimes, most urgently halting the arms trade, and urging that the genocidal situation can only be prevented by a mass increase of global solidarity with the people of Palestine, and that can restrain the Israeli war machine. This call, addressed to counterparts and people of conscience, has 5 core demands of workers around the world. Those demands are the following: refuse to build weapons destined for Israel, refuse to transport weapons to Israel, to pass motions in their trade unions to this effect, to take action against complicit companies involved in implementing Israel's brutal and illegal siege, and to pressure governments to stop all military trade with Israel, and in the case of the US, to stop funding it. This statement also cites previous successes in trade union power when it comes to bringing a halt to Israel's recurring onslaughts of Gaza. In 2021, unionized Italian and South African dock workers refused to load arms shipments to Israel in a show of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Those at the very top, who are fanning the flames of the genocide in Gaza, have foolishly underestimated the sheer ferocity of what the international labor movement can achieve. It seems they may have forgotten about the power of the Duns retail workers in Dublin in 1984 and how their boycott of South African goods and strikes helped bring down the apartheid regime. A strike and boycott effort echoed around the world that was personally commended by Nelson Mandela, who years later stated that how he was touched by how ordinary people far away from the crucible of apartheid cared for our freedom. Perhaps the ruling classes need reminding of the unionized Rolls-Royce workers in Glasgow who refused to service Chilean dictator Pinochet's fighter jets in 1973, saving countless political prisoners' lives and managing to ground half of the junta's air force despite being thousands of miles away. This past 7 months, we've seen millions take to the streets in support of Gaza. The mass support is there, and it must now be personified into action beyond chants and rallying cries. We should all immediately heed the call of Palestinian trade unions. It is well within our collective capacity to cut all arms trade between our governments and the Israeli government. Their call is tangible and it is achievable. Israel is blocking aid from entering Gaza, depriving millions of clean water, food, and electricity. What Palestinians need right now is our hands-on solidarity and not our charity. In Britain, there is already an ongoing campaign targeting Israeli arms companies by the group Palestine Action, demonstrating exactly what Palestinian trade unions are currently calling for, but needed on a much larger scale. In 2020, Palestine Action was formed by activists who used direct action to shut down Israeli arms factories that operate across Britain. They target Elbit Systems, Israel's largest private arms company, by consistently occupying its factories and offices, and so far have already managed to permanently close one factory. They have also cost Elbit over £280 million pounds in contracts, and much more in damages. It's important to remember that while we are standing side by side with other oppressed peoples, our oppressors are working in tandem with one another. Israeli arms company Elbit Systems isn't only making arms to use on Palestinians, it's also supplying them to oppressive regimes around the world. From murderous drone strikes in Gaza, imperialist border security operations in the US, in the EU, Britain, and weapon exports to regimes including Myanmar and Azerbaijan. Israel has a history of providing arms to carry out genocides, from supplying bullets, rifles, and grenades to the Hutu militias used to kill over 800,000 Tutsis during the Rwandan genocide, to providing Guatemalan state forces with deadly Galil assault rifles used to carry out the genocide of over 200,000 indigenous Mayans. As workers, we should not only see the Palestinian trade unions' call to action as an act of solidarity, but as a duty to ensure the horrors of the past never happen again or anywhere else in the world. And that is just the end of the piece. And unfortunately, our third and final speaker will not be able to join us this evening. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Jerry Carroll and Austin Harney. And please do follow Palestinian Return Center social media to see any upcoming events. We have various panel discussions and webinars like today's and like Monday's coming up. So please do follow PRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and see the upcoming events there. Thank you.